So essentially what we're going to do, we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about professions and then how that influences our efforts in emergency services. So here's our agenda for this morning, and we're going to look at a couple of things. Right off the bat, I'd like to acknowledge the assistance of Mr. John Damaris at National Headquarters Operations. He was gracious enough to supply a number of years worth of spreadsheets regarding both national and all-wing statistics going back to 2009. So we're going to look at some of that. We'll have a call to action. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between qualification and proficiency. But first off, let's talk a little bit about a profession. So profession, we talk about or we think about professions, maybe medicine, education, law, military and stuff. There are certain elements that define a profession. The first being that there's a clearly defined entrance process. There's some sort of training or some sort of rites of passage, etc., that one must take to be able to enter into a profession. The second thing is that the profession as a body has clearly identified standards for maintaining membership, and that those standards are self-policed. We don't rely on external bodies, particularly governmental or law enforcement agencies, to enforce professional policies or standards. There is an element of service or sacrifice that's generally involved in a profession. And then there's a specific or defined body of knowledge that profession revolves around. And understanding that body of knowledge is very important to be able to succeed or to become a professional in a certain field. Now, we talk a lot about Civil Air Patrol members being volunteer professionals. And so the first question that we have to ask is, what in fact do we profess? Is there a certain defined body of knowledge that we embrace as an organization that provides either doctrine or informs our actions in the things that we do? Do we have standards for continued membership? I think that we do. And we've talked about the importance of identifying those that may start moving away from the center body of the wing or our squadrons. Do we self-police? Yes, there is a process that's available to be able to correct behaviors, leading from retraining all the way to separation from Civil Air Patrol for cause. And then the last question is, are we experts in our body of knowledge? Well, that varies from day to day and varies on the amount of time that we spend in studying and applying the body of knowledge, the doctrine, the literature regarding Civil Air Patrol. So I'd like to talk a little bit about where we are. As has been mentioned already this morning, the past year has been a pretty radical departure from what Civil Air Patrol is used to doing. And one of the elements of Civil Air Patrol that's taken a big hit is the group that's featured in the center photo here, being the cadet program. So let's delve into a little bit about some of the background and some of the statistics regarding Civil Air Patrol and what we're doing. This slide shows the Civil Air Patrol national membership starting in fiscal year 2010 and coming forward through fiscal year 2020. Colonel Hess has already talked about where we are today in fiscal year 21 so far. But as you can see, Civil Air Patrol had a peak nationally, had a peak in membership in fiscal 2019, and then has seen a pretty significant drop in membership to the next year. It will be interesting for us to see if that trend continues, or if, as things open up regarding the pandemic and limitations on our activities, if that we're able to resuscitate and return back to previous numbers. This is a slide that shows nationally SAR results versus total flight hours. And as you can see, the total flight hours for Civil Air Patrol peaked around in 2010, peaked in the 110,000 hours in a year. And then there's kind of been a slow decline. There's a short peak in FY 2016, another one in 2019, and then a rather remarkable drop in 2020. But as you can see across the bottom, the SAR saves, the SAR finds, and SAR hours seem to be fairly constant, and they represent a distinct minority in the amount of operational hours that Civil Air Patrol shows. And we're going to look more at that data later. Let's look a little bit closer to home and look at our wing membership by type. So this is broken out in seniors, cadets, and in total. As you can see, for most years up until FY 2015, senior members have outnumbered cadet members. In 2015, we began having in-school squadrons associated with Utah Military Academy, which boosted our numbers. And then as you go further to the right, you can see that the cadet numbers dropped in FY 20, as Colonel Hess mentioned earlier. But as you look at the senior numbers, they're fairly constant across the decade, and that's something that we can consider as a strength and leverage that. This slide shows the difference, or compares aircrew members. In other words, any member that holds a qualification as aerial photographer, mission scanner, mission observer, mission pilot, versus all wing members that hold any emergency services qualifications. And you can see that our pilot numbers, or aircrew numbers, excuse me, are approximately 1/3 of all ES participants until we get to about FY 2018, when we start having a little bit of a decrease in the number of qualified aircrew. So before I go any farther, one of the things that we need to focus on, and I would like to encourage as the Director of Emergency Services, is that we need more wing members who are willing to participate in incident management. And we can use cadets as well as senior members in these positions. And when I'm talking about incident management, I'm talking about anything that touches the control of forces in the field, whether that be as the incident commander, which we need more qualified and proficient incident commanders, but we also need other positions filled with willing and motivated individuals, particularly finance and admin, safety officer, and let's see, what's the other one behind it? Yeah. But the important point to remember here is that if we do not have a viable, proficient incident management system, there is no way for us to have any incidents. In other words, if we don't have people to man the incident command post and that management team, we are not able to respond either by to an emergency request that comes through the Air Force Rescue Coordination Center, or be able to sponsor operational exercises. So please reach out to those that are around us in the wing and encourage individuals, even if they have the idea of, well, I just joined Civil Air Patrol to fly. It's important that they realize that those members realize that they need to take a turn in the box, so that at some point in time, when they're given an opportunity to fly, that somebody else is be able to support their operation through the incident management team. So we need to spread the wealth and spread the opportunity. Okay, now, as was mentioned earlier, Utah Wing, the SAR finds and saves in Utah Wing have been tailing off over the past decade. And I think that's due to a number of different things. And we'll go into some of that. But as you can see, starting with the data that's in FY 2018, we have now the data that shows the influence of the radar or cell phone forensics teams. And we'll talk more about how that's impacted search and rescue in a little bit. So I want to take a little bit of time and look backwards. That may seem counterintuitive, but I'm a great student of Winston Churchill, and one of the things that he emphasized, he was a great historian himself, but also quite a visionary, and he encapsulated this idea of the farther back you look, the farther forward you are likely to see. And so what things can we look back at in Civil Air Patrol that may give us some hints or some clues about how to move forward from the position that we're in right now to a different operational environment, which would help us as an organization. This past summer, Frank Blazich, who previously had been the Civil Air Patrol historian, he now is working with a university and continues as a CAP volunteer as opposed to a paid employee. But he left Civil Air Patrol and printed or published a book through Air University regarding CAP history, and an important part of CAP history that a lot of us look back to, but maybe not fully understand, and that's the early days of the Civil Air Patrol Coastal Patrol operations. And the book's called An Honorable Place in American Air Power. And this is should be a favorite in Civil Air Patrol because the price is right. You can download a free copy of this book by going to airuniversity.af.edu/aupress/articles, and his book is there, and you can download it in PDF form and save it on whatever device you like to use. Let's talk just a little bit about the Cap Coastal Patrol and see if we can discover, first off, why this is such an important element of Civil Air Patrol history, but also be able to see if there are some ways that we can discern some clues for us as we move forward. So the Cap Coastal Patrol was organized in early 1942 and became operational on the 5th of March in 1942 in response to a German Navy operation that was called Operation Drumbeat, which basically moved submarines into the close inshore waters off of North America in an attempt to cripple the response of the United States as they joined the war following Pearl Harbor. The first patrol base was established at Atlantic City, New Jersey, but the first operational sortie actually occurred from Rehoboth Beach in Delaware. As kind of a tip to the future, the Civil Air Patrol Coastal Patrol was operating under the 1st Air Force or the 1st Bomber Command when they initiated operations. And the numbered Air Force that we report to and receive taskings through now is 1st Air Force. Each one of these coastal patrol bases had a distinct table of organization, meaning that they had an identified number of pilots, they had an identified number of staff to support the operation. They had their own maintenance, and they were able to establish 21 bases in sort of a cookie cutter fashion, using volunteer forces that stepped forward as civilians. To be able to operate, they were given a distinct uniform. Now, initially, the Civil Air Patrol was under the Office of Civilian Defense, and the work uniform for civil defense workers were blue twill, which kind of touches the blue BDU or the Smurf uniform that we see today. Later, they were authorized, since they were operating for in behalf of the Army Air Forces, they were given an Army-style uniform with distinct differences that identified them as volunteers. Now, one of the things that I found interesting in here was that the members, although they were volunteers and civilians, they were considered civilians traveling in company of the Army, reaching back to the frontier Indian War days. There were some laws that were still on the books that governed civilian support contractors and such that were operating on the frontier with the Army. And these individuals in those days were held to Army standard legally. And Civil Air Patrol, while a civilian organization, was given a body of regulations to follow so that there would be a good order and discipline within the organization. The establishment of these bases was strictly a civilian effort. In some instances, particularly in Florida and Georgia, the state itself donated some funds to be able to establish these bases, but by and large, these coastal patrol bases were established purely through the volunteers' efforts, meaning that they found their own lodging, they organized their own messing, they, in some instances, had to build their own buildings by obtaining scrap lumber or being able to use donated materials, etc. And so there was a clear line between, on the property end, there was a clear line of distinction between military and Civil Air Patrol. So at its peak, the Coastal Patrol operated 21 bases. Basically, they covered the offshore, or the near inshore, waters from about Matamoros on the Gulf Coast of Mexico up to the waters in Maine, and then on the international border, the Canadian military picked up responsibility for the patrol from there. In the course of approximately 18 months, the Coastal Patrol flew nearly 87,000 sorties. They flew almost 250,000 flight hours. You can see what they accomplished during that 18 months with ships in distress, identifying suspected U-boats, locating 363 survivors, and identified 17 floating mines, which could cause damage to other ships. They lost 90 aircraft due to mishaps, and 26 members were killed on operational missions due to either pilot error or later on, as they were flying the wings off the planes, they literally were flying the wings off the planes, and the aircraft started to fail. But the Civil Air Patrol, because of the work that they were doing, they were transferred from control by the Office of Civilian Defense to the U.S. Army in early 1943, in March of 1943, as an auxiliary to the Army Air Forces. Now, Blazich makes this observation, and being a recovering Air Force person myself, the military is very cautious about who they allow to deliver deadly force. And so Blazich here says that the key to having the Army Air Corps and the Army Air Forces trust Civil Air Patrol with live weapons was their competency, which is another word for proficiency, and their professionalism. And we talked about professionals before. And because of those two elements, then trust was earned to be able to move into new operational fields. Now, all good things obviously have to come to an end. And at some point in time, the Coastal Patrol operation had to change as well. And there were a number of factors that led into that. Number one was that because there were increased land-based forces operating on the near inshore, it caused the leadership of the German Navy to move their U-boat assets farther into the central Atlantic. There were some technological changes that influenced the change from, or the cessation of the coastal patrol bases, and those were improved convoy procedures. Curiously, the Navy forgot the lessons that they had learned during World War I and didn't really have an active near inshore convoy program until the spring of 1943. And once that occurred, the combination between grouping the cargo ships together, having some escort, and being able to have overhead scouts, meaning the aerial forces to include Civil Air Patrol, it was harder for the U-boats to stalk and then kill cargo ships near inshore. The Two-Ocean Navy Act of 1939 started bearing fruit in 1942 and 43, and so there were increased numbers of anti-submarine warfare ships that were available to be able to work in conjunction with other forces. A technological change was the development of airborne centimeter radar that was able to develop or provide enough discrimination in signal return to actually paint and tell the difference between a submarine, for example, that was on the surface, or a piece of junk that was floating on the surface. And the last thing was the development and employment of the Escort aircraft carriers, which could then operate anti-submarine aircraft farther out into the Atlantic. I've got a picture here of the USS Guadalcanal that captured intact a German submarine about 2 days before D-Day in 1944. And that German submarine remains on display at the Chicago Museum of Industry and Technology, I believe. But as a result of all these things, the Coastal Patrol kind of became obsolete and irrelevant. And so Civil Air Patrol was kind of left with, well, now what? So the first Coastal Patrol base, as I mentioned, was organized and established at Atlantic City, New Jersey. And this is a picture of what that base looked like in 1942. When I was traveling on business in 2015, I went to this place. The airfield still exists. It has been closed. I crawled all over this airfield looking for evidence of Civil Air Patrol presence, and there was nothing there. One of the things that I do when I travel is I visit local Civil Air Patrol squadrons to be able to kind of see what other squadrons or other wings are doing. And so I happened to attend a meeting of the Atlantic City Composite Squadron when I was there in 2015, and just kind of asked some questions. One of the questions that I asked was, what's significant about your squadron with respect to World War II? And none of the members of that squadron were able to make the connection between the Cap Coastal Patrol Base 1 and their squadron. If you're traveling around on business or something like that, please, I recommend that you visit the local squadrons so that you can learn about Civil Air Patrol and other places in the United States. Now, going back to this idea of change of mission, I have pictures here of Ernest King on the right and George Marshall on the left. Ernest King was the chief of naval operations, or the professional leader of the U.S. Navy during World War II, and George Marshall was the Army chief of staff. Neither of these individuals were very supportive of Civil Air Patrol participating in the anti-submarine effort in 1942. Marshall was ambivalent and allowed his staff officer, Hap Arnold, go ahead with an experiment of using trained civilian volunteers to fulfill a military mission. King, on the other hand, was adamantly opposed and felt that this would be a waste of resource because the civilian pilots would get lost at sea and that they would have to divert military assets to go find these people, et cetera, et cetera. But what they found, both of these leaders found over the 18 months of the Coastal Patrol, was that the Civil Air Patrol was actually, in fact, able to execute the mission in a professional manner. And Blazich comments, that the personnel conducted their operations with quiet professionalism. They learned, adapted, and earned the respect of the military establishment. And so as a result of that, there were other missions that Civil Air Patrol then was able to garner and be able to use to remain relevant in the war effort during 43, 44, and 45. And these are a couple of the things that Civil Air Patrol was asked to do. And I understand that Greg Soder wants to volunteer to do this tow target thing again with our friends up at Hill Air Force Base. I think I'll watch that from the ground. Okay, let's move forward to now. And I'd like to introduce to you somebody that I knew from active duty. This is C.Q. Brown. He's now the Air Force Chief of Staff. And in August of 2016, August of 2020, he published kind of his vision of what he wanted to accomplish in the time while he's Chief of Staff. And the title of the document is Accelerate, Change, or Lose. Again, this is a great price on a book. You can download it for free off of the internet. He makes a couple of important points and some things that while he's addressing the Air Force at large, he continues to use the word airman. And so when using the word airman, he's also addressing Civil Air Patrol based on David Goldfein, the previous Chief of Staff's identifying Civil Air Patrol members as part of the total force and as airmen. And General Brown talks about operating in a dynamic environment with factors that are have us taking various actions, in other words, different things. Our Air Force must accelerate change to control and exploit the air domain to the standard that the nation expects. Let's see, if we don't change, if we fail to adapt, we risk losing the certainty with which we have defended our national interests for decades. Our nation has come, let me back up here. Our nation has come to expect much from its Air Force, and we're part of that. And we'll rise to the challenge, but to do so, we must accelerate change now. So he's addressing from a big picture, he's addressing the switch from dealing with low to medium intensity conflict with insurgency or terrorist forces to pivoting to what's going on in the Indo-Pacific Command and the Pacific region with near-peer conflict with China. But for us, that may have some implications as well. With the change in focus, there will be increase in training operations tempo for our neighbors at Hill Air Force Base. And there will be opportunities for us as a wing to be able to be participants in or facilitators of some of that training. Okay, now, want to look here just to kind of drive home this idea about where we're spending our time. And this, one of the things that's kind of tricky here is that the database that Moose sent to me changes a little bit in that they look over a couple of years, they look at flight sorties and then they switch to flight hours. So we'll have to do a little bit of mental gymnastics here. But this is flight sorties for FY18 and FY19. And as you can see, the SAR box is a distinct minority amongst all of the other mission boxes here. In 2018, they didn't break out the difference, or they didn't break out the Form 5, Form 91 kinds of things. They didn't break out the B's and C missions. Those just kind of all fall in the other category. But if you look, particularly at FY 2019, 4.5, well, let's do the math better. 9 out of every 20 sorties that Civil Air Patrol Utah Wing flew in FY 2019 had a cadet on board. That's an opportunity for us to leverage where we need to be able to start re-engaging cadet members that may have walked away. We need to be very active in getting back to this sort of opportunity. FY20 is kind of an anomaly because of, well, it happened in 2020, so everything was weird about 2020, right? And I'm not exactly sure, based in the data set that I received from Moose, from John Damaris, the operations exercise bucket seems to be a little high, and I tried to look back into Wimmers to see if I can get a little better understanding of what was going on there, because that shows the operations training. I think what happened is that some of our COVID-19 activities were coded under operation training kind of things. But again, you can see that there's for junior ROTC and cadet orientation flight, that those two buckets dropped pretty significantly during 2020. Okay. Now, as we're flying along, this is looking national data again. This is looking at SAR saves, and you see the develop, or the in 2018, Cap National starts breaking out the saves that were occurred primarily due to either cell phone or radar forensics versus doing it the old-fashioned way. I think the cell phone and radar forensics teams really started being involved, back here in FY 2014. But you can see that the way that we are doing business has significantly changed. That leads back to the imperative that was given to us by General Brown and underscored by General Smith, our own commander, that we need to start looking at the way we do business differently and maybe seek different partners to serve with. I pulled this slide off of the radar forensics page. This is their data, and basically you can see how their participation in missions over the last number of years has increased exponentially. So this isn't going away. It's a feature that we're going to need to consider as we develop further operational training exercises to address the current operating environment. I don't think we've seen any of these floating around on Utah Lake recently. And so we need to make sure that we don't get stuck in the mindset that was tempting in 1943 of, well, Civil Air Patrol finds submarines. We need to start thinking about other places where we can leverage our expertise to be able to remain operationally relevant, but also be able to meet the current needs of the community in which we live. Now, Cap USAF, okay, our partner that provides the active duty oversight to Civil Air Patrol activities, they commissioned a consultant report that was published in the summer of 2020. And the initial question that Cap USAF asked the consultant to look into was, what's the correct aircraft mix for Civil Air Patrol activities? And basically, as this research group started peeling the onion back, they realized that that was the wrong question. And the question really that Cap USAF should have been asking was, what are the operational mix that Civil Air Patrol should be training against? And does the U.S. Air Force actually need a civilian auxiliary? And so this is a very interesting report, and it's been released to the wings more for information. And Cap USAF is I'm sure they're discussing this, trying to get their arms around all the findings. This is about a 35-page document, so we won't look at every page, but we will look at what their summary of findings and their recommendations were. Number one, they said that Civil Air Patrol is in fact a valuable resource for U.S. Air Force and for the United States. They felt that at the squadron level, squadrons are asked to do so much that it's difficult for them to be develop expertise in a particular field. And I think they were looking at it, comparing Civil Air Patrol squadrons to U.S. Air Force squadrons, which are very much type and mission defined. So we may see some more about that in reorganization of a wing to say, these are flying squadrons, these are communication squadrons, etc. But that I don't see that happening very quickly. Next point that they had was that Civil Air Patrol has the wrong Air Force or aircraft fleet for current and future missions. They particularly were looking at the amount of cadet orientation and training that's performed, and they said, this could be done with aircraft that are a lot less complex than a $700,000 or $800,000 Cessna 172. They're concerned that Civil Air Patrol funding is disconnected from mission kinds of stuff, And because this is kind of a unique animal for the Air Force, that the Air Force needs to figure out a better way for it to help sell the value of Civil Air Patrol to Congress. And the last point here was that the cadets are leaving just as they become eligible to fly. Now, this is kind of true in a number of youth organizations. When teens turn 16 and 17, they start looking at other things. But this is precisely the time when they can do what they came to Civil Air Patrol to do, and that's to participate in aviation. And so we need to be able to do some things aviation-wise to be able to hold cadets to us so that the calendar can catch up to them in their desires to fly. Now, I want to talk a little bit about proficiency and qualification. And the definitions of qualification and proficiency are shown here. We record our qualifications on a document that's called the CAP 101 form, or the 101 card. Now, it's given that name not because the goal is to have 101 qualifications listed on your card. It just happened to fall in a sequence of, it's between Form 100 and Form 102, okay? We need to start thinking about the CAP 101 card as being an expression of our proficiency, meaning areas where we have a high degree of competence, skill, and expertise, as opposed to the sash that some youth organizations use to have merit badges or other emblems of some sort of accomplishment on it. We need to be focusing on being able to perform a task correctly every time in every situation. And if you have 43 qualifications listed on your 101 card, I challenge you to be able to show to me that you can perform each one of those qualifications to a high standard. Okay? Now, the bottom line here is pencil whipped qualification to put something on a CAP 101 form helps absolutely nobody. Okay, I'll say that again. Qualifications that aren't earned help no one. Proficiency, on the other hand, saves lives, and that's the business that we're in. So we need to be focusing on proficiency. Are we bringing value to the table? So I'd say the answer to that question is yes. In FY29, the value of volunteer hours from Utah Wing amounted to $2.5 million. Well, that's pretty significant in a small state like Utah, where you're looking at the input of essentially 300 people. So, yes, we do bring value. Okay, so that's nice. So what? Okay. It's important for us to emphasize that, yes, CAP is valued, and we add to our communities by our service. Number two, cadets are important, and they answer some of the why and what questions regarding operational planning. Now, we need to get used to having cadets filling key roles in incident management. For example, can a cadet be, for example, a communication unit leader? The answer to that question is yes, the cadet can do that. Can a cadet be a small UAS mission pilot? The answer to that question is yes, a cadet can do that. And we need to leverage those things to be able to help our cadet force feel valued and help them to be able to gain new skills and continue to grow in the organization. So we're going to have emphasis. We probably should be focusing more emphasis on cadet wings and cadet small UAS operations. Okay, yep, we're the victims of our own success. The CAP radar and cell phone forensics teams have been game changers. There are other technologies, obviously, that are involved in this, but basically, this has changed the way we're going to have to do business, and we need to own up to it. Okay, we're going to need to start developing other partners for our ES operations, and we need to think a little bit outside of the box here. And bottom, from what we've learned in 2020 and some of the years before, is disaster relief is the new SAR. Okay, so here are a couple of pictures of some of the early changes that we're going to be seeing here in our operations with supported disaster relief, cadets and seniors being more involved in small UAS or drone operations, that we need a closer working relationship between seniors and cadets in developing their emergency services proficiency and give them opportunities to lead where appropriate. Picture here of the one on the left is from a picture taken as the Oregon wing, as they're taking a little pause during their forest fire operations this summer. Some of you will recognize the gray Civil Air Patrol Turbo 182 that's parked back there. That happened to be in our hangar for about a week or two last fall. That's the Taliban Turbo that was on its way from from Boston to Oregon wing, and basically they had to divert into Salt Lake and leave the plane for a while. Operation Pulse Lift, Civil Air Patrol has been a great leader developing a relationship with American Red Cross. Arizona Wing has been the lead in that. And then also we have remote imaging, and I guess we can have remote communications. California Wing has now picked up a tsunami warning mission. Paul Silva is a friend of mine. He and I worked together as during Hurricane Katrina, and he said the following: airmen have an annoying habit of talking big when speaking to decision makers about future operational capabilities. It is always better to promise less than you can deliver. So, what are our operational futures? We'll retain some partners, and there will be some new partners at the table. These are some logos of some organizations that we may be working with in the future, or we may be working with differently in the future. For example, with the Department of Public Safety, they have a number of helicopters that can do search and rescue in some regards in a more efficient manner than we can. And so maybe we shouldn't be competing with them for the search and rescue mission, but maybe some of the operational support, for example, communications, hybrid, those sorts of things. U.S. Forest Service, aerial imaging, that sort of stuff, and then helping our uniformed brethren as well. So in summary, which is probably the two favorite words in listening to a lecture, is these two words, in summary. Civil Air Patrol is comprised of volunteer professionals. That's our vision, and we need to make that happen. We need to understand our history to envision our new future. Our operational environment is changing, and it requires new approaches to how we do business. And to secure new operational lanes, we have to be proficient. Oh, are there any questions? Let's see. I guess there are no questions. All right. Well, there being none. What's that?
Compliments.
Oh, compliments?
Compliment. Thank you. Well done. Bravo, Zoom.
Oh, thank you. Okay, well, being 9:56, that'll give us an opportunity to hit the latrine. Thank you for your participation and attention, and we'll see you around the patch. Have a good conference. Thank you.
Thanks for a great presentation.
Good presentation.
Yeah.